Your goodness is a mask. It hides a face you fear. Every donation is self-congratulatory. Each righteous post hides status anxiety. You have learned to perform goodness while feeding the very beast you claim to battle. Those who parade their morality most vigorously often harbor the most insatiable shadows. Consider the speed with which the corruption fighter accepts small gifts, and how quickly the equality champion builds new hierarchies. Watch closely. The dancer who performs virtue most elaborately is often dancing to distract you from what happens backstage. In all ages, the way to make a fool of a man is to elevate him to the rank of a moral person. Nietzsche recognized in Beyond Good and Evil what you refuse to see. Your morality isn't inherent or divinely ordained, but a carefully constructed system of control, starting with you. The chains you forge are invisible precisely because you have polished them to a deceptive appeal. Why do we feel the need to be seen as good? What part of our brain constantly wrestles with ethical dilemmas? Forget philosophy. It's the amygdala. There, where validation means survival and exclusion means death. A charitable volunteer photographs orphans for Instagram. That environmental activist flies business class to climate conferences. The anti-racist intellectual only interacts with like-minded people. Moral licensing permits these contradictions to exist without cognitive dissonance. Having purchased ethical indulgences, one is free to sin elsewhere. This isn't just hypocrisy. It's the operating principle of today's moral economy. A study by Monet and Miller revealed increased prejudiced attitudes among subjects who had earlier showed a lack of prejudice. The freedom to indulge in otherwise condemned behaviors becomes the price paid for a self-perception of moral superiority. You unknowingly play your part in this economy. Donating to disaster relief doesn't justify ignoring the homeless man outside your apartment. Your attendance at the protest seems to have made you feel justified in treating service workers condescendingly. Each virtuous act deposits moral credit in an account from which you withdraw to fund your small cruelties. Moral licensing, writes psychologist Benoit Monin, occurs when past moral behavior makes people more likely to do potentially immoral things without worrying about feeling or appearing immoral. Note carefully, your goodness does not purify your subsequent actions. It merely blinds you, casting a deceitful glare that hides their implications. What's hidden beneath your kindness? Carl Jung cautioned that light and shadow are intrinsically linked. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Despite your virtuous appearance, an unconscious shadow betrays itself through subtle imperfections. In his writing, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung characterizes the shadow as that hidden, repressed, largely inferior and guilt-laden personality, the ultimate origins of which extend to our animal heritage. The more strenuously you identify with moral perfectionism, the more aggressively you must suppress these aspects of yourself, and the more violently they will eventually emerge. Consider the irony. The moralist vehemently campaigned against sexual deviancy, only to be later exposed to engaging in those very acts. Observe the pacifist whose suppressed hostility manifests itself through the subtle tactics of passive-aggressive behavior, a quiet yet damaging form of manipulation. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the shadow finds expression, manifesting openly or conversely in a disguised form that is the opposite of its true nature. It is not the absence of darkness that defines your goodness, but the clever way in which you conceal and disguise it from plain sight. Ironically, we can interpret the saint's halo, that symbol of divine grace, as a shadow turned inside out, a photographic negative mirroring the saint's suppressed primal urges and desires. Your sense of morality isn't a genuine reflection of your character. Instead, it serves as a defense mechanism, a way to cope with and conceal aspects of yourself that you find too painful to confront. In speaking of justice, you present it not as a practical psychological strategy, but as a metaphysical certainty, a fixed and unchanging truth. Nietzsche's perspectivism shatters this comfortable illusion. There are no moral phenomena at all, but only a moral interpretation of phenomena. Your moral judgments are not discoveries of objective truth, but impositions of will, attempts to reshape the world according to your preferences. On the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche excavates the psychology beneath Christian morality. The slave revolt in morality begins when resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. The weak, unable to express power directly, redefine the terms. Aggression becomes evil, submission becomes good. This inversion serves psychological needs while pretending to serve metaphysical truth. Your moral outrage is not evidence of your superior character, but of your resentment, your inability to accept a world that does not conform to your demands. Each time you denounce another's selfishness or insensitivity, you are not describing objective failings, but expressing your frustrated will to power. The democratic movement, writes Nietzsche, is the inheritance of the Christian movement. Your progressive politics, your humanitarian concerns, your commitment to equality, these are secularized versions of slave morality, strategies of the weak to constrain the strong through moral condemnation rather than physical force. Your charitable work, paradoxically, strengthens the very systems of dependence you intend to reform. Your purported expressions of solidarity actually silence those you claim to represent. Your indignation is purely performative, serving only to denote your affiliation with a select group. This exemplifies Barbara Oakley's concept of pathological altruism. Help that harm, virtue that violates. Pathological altruism, Oakley writes, can be conceived as behavior in which attempts to promote the welfare of another or others results instead in harm that an external observer would conclude was reasonably foreseeable. The humanitarian who creates dependency, the parent who overprotects to the point of crippling, the activist whose solutions create fresh problems, all exemplify this pathology. People from privileged backgrounds visit marginalized communities. They claim to help, but mainly boost their self-image. Their actions strengthen existing power imbalances. They gain narcissistic gratification. Local self-governance suffers. What underlying psychological imperative compels altruistic behavior despite potential self-harm? The solution hinges on the helper's self-perception, specifically their dependence on being viewed as virtuous, indispensable, and morally upright. The repercussions for those who received help become subordinate to this psychological need. Do you recognize how expressing moral judgments increases your social influence? Tosi and Warmke would diagnose your condition as moral grandstanding. You do not seek justice, you seek applause. Your ethics are a theater where you simultaneously perform and applaud yourself. Moral grandstanding, they write in Grandstanding, the use and abuse of moral talk, is the use of moral talk for self-promotion. The grandstander hijacks moral discourse, not to advance ethical understanding but to enhance their status, to be seen as morally sensitive, as righteously indignant, as one of the enlightened few. It is notable how quickly moral discussions on social media devolve into displays of competitive indignation. Each participant seeks to portray themselves as more virtuous, sensitive, and morally sophisticated than their predecessors. A display of moral grandstanding overshadows the stated reason. Virtue signaling describes adopting moral positions for social value, not truth or utility. A rainbow profile picture, a solidarity hashtag, or a public declaration of allyship are examples that underpin this concept. These are social signals, not moral actions. They're badges of membership in a community of the supposedly good. Do you feel superior handing out food to the homeless? Do you feel self-righteous when criticizing a politician? Is your sense of self tied to these moral acts? Without them, what remains of you? Albert Bandura's concept of moral disengagement explains how you maintain your virtuous self-image, despite the behavior that contradicts it. Through mechanisms like moral justification, euphemistic labeling, helpful comparison, displacement of responsibility, diffusion of responsibility, disregarding consequences, dehumanization, and attribution of blame, you perform psychological acrobatics to preserve your moral self-concept. You condemn the oil executive while driving your car to the protest. You denounce economic inequality while participating in the very systems that generate it. You lament political polarization while demonizing those who disagree with you. These contradictions should collapse your moral identity, yet they do not, because you have mastered the art of moral self-deception. Anne Tenbrunsel's research on ethical fading reveals how ethical dimensions of decisions gradually disappear from consideration when they conflict with other interests. You do not consciously choose to violate your principles. You simply stop seeing the ethical implications of your choices. The moral falls away, leaving only the practical, the convenient, the self-serving. The corruption that lies beyond corruption, writes philosopher Kostaika Bradatan, is virtue. Your goodness is not merely insufficient, it is the problem itself, for it blinds you to your own contradictions. You judge others by standards you exempt yourself from meeting. This is not an oversight, but a psychological necessity. C. Daniel Batson's research on moral hypocrisy shows that people wish to appear moral without the inconvenience of actually being moral. Given the opportunity to assign themselves favorable tasks while appearing fair, subjects consistently chose self-interest while maintaining the illusion of fairness. When exposed, they adjusted their behavior, not by becoming more moral, but by creating more sophisticated justifications. Your condemnation of corporate greed persists, alongside your pursuit of career advancement. Your critique of consumerism does not prevent your acquisition of status symbols. Your advocacy for compassion does not extend to those who challenge your worldview. This is not exceptional moral failure, but the standard operating procedure of the moral mind. Moral hypocrisy, writes Batson, is a motivation to appear moral, while, if possible, avoiding the cost of actually being moral. You are not trying to be good. You are trying to appear good while maximizing self-interest. The genius of your strategy lies in its concealment even from yourself. Hannah Arendt revealed evil's bureaucratic banality. I show virtue's narcissistic spectacle. Both stem from abandoning ethical thinking. Both rely on prefabricated moral algorithms. Arendt's portrait of Adolf Eichmann revealed a man who was not monstrous, but ordinary, who replaced ethical judgment with procedural compliance. The trouble with Eichmann, she wrote, was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, that they were, and still are, terribly and terrifyingly normal. Your virtue operates with the same thoughtlessness. You adopt ethical positions, not through careful consideration, but through social conformity. You perform goodness according to scripts provided by your moral community. You outsource your ethical thinking to influencers, public intellectuals, and the consensus of your social circle. The banality of virtue, like the banality of evil, lies in this abdication of judgment. You do not ask, is this right? But will this be seen as right by those whose approval I seek? Morality becomes compliance with social expectations, rather than engagement with ethical complexity. The moral narcissist, as described by Kenneth Stern, is more concerned with appearing virtuous than with actual outcomes. Their moral positions are accessories, identity markers, personal brand elements. The suffering they claim to address is secondary to the cultivation of their moral self-image. Moral narcissism, Stern writes, asks only what makes the person who espouses a position feel good about himself. The narcissist's question is not, does this help? But, does this align with my desired self-perception? Not, is this effective? But, is this consistent with who I believe myself to be? Your outrage over distant atrocities while ignoring nearby suffering reveals this narcissism. Your preference for grand moral gestures over modest practical solutions exposes it. Your tendency to abandon causes when they no longer provide emotional satisfaction confirms it. You are not serving others. You are serving your self-image, the hungry child, the political prisoner, the marginalized community. These are not the beneficiaries of your virtue, but its props, the supporting cast in the drama of your moral identity. Robert Boyers warns of the tyranny of virtue, the way moral perfectionism paradoxically leads to intolerance and cruelty. The policing of opinion, the emphasis on correct speech, the hounding of those who think differently, these were hallmarks of the new orthodoxy. Your pursuit of moral purity does not elevate discourse, but stifles it. The contemporary moral landscape has become a minefield, where one misstep can trigger social explosion. The tolerance you preach does not extend to ideological difference. The compassion you advocate does not apply to those deemed morally deficient. You have not eliminated judgment, but merely shifted its targets. The tyrant, writes Boyers, is one who knows for certain what is right, not only for herself, but for everyone else. Your moral certainty, your conviction that you have found the correct position on complex issues, reveals not wisdom, but hubris. The more certain you are of your virtue, the more likely you are to impose it tyrannically. The sanctimony with which you express your views betray their psychological function. You are not sharing information, but performing superiority. Each moral pronouncement is a bid for status, an assertion of membership in the elect. This is not dialogue, but dominance display. What might a morality beyond self-deception look like? First, it would acknowledge its psychological origins, the will to power, the need for approval, the fear of exclusion. It would recognize moral impulses as biological and social phenomena rather than metaphysical truths. Second, it would embrace contradiction rather than concealing it. The truly ethical person is not the one who has eliminated inconsistency, but the one who has learned to live productively with it, who acknowledges the gap between ideals and implementation without abandoning either. Third, it would prioritize effectiveness over expression. The question would shift from, does this position make me feel virtuous? To, does this action create the outcomes I claim to value? Evidence would matter more than intention, results more than rhetoric. Fourth, it would cultivate humility rather than certainty. Moral positions would be held as provisional, subject to revision based on new information. The ethical person would be characterized not by unwavering conviction, but by willingness to reconsider, to learn, to adapt. Fifth, it would integrate rather than repress the shadow. Jung's insight applies. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. A mature morality acknowledges and channels darker impulses rather than denying their existence. You will object, of course. This essay speaks not of you but of others, those less reflective, those less authentically committed. This very thought confirms my thesis. Your goodness has become your blindness. Break the mirror. Descend into the abyss. What waits below is not redemption, but reality, the unvarnished truth of your motivations, the complex interplay of selfishness and altruism, the biological and social forces that shape your moral identity. Only by abandoning the illusion of virtue can you begin the genuine work of living ethically in a world that resists moral simplification. The light you seek is not above, but below, in the shadow you have spent a lifetime avoiding. The path to genuine ethical existence begins not with purification, but with contamination, immersion in the very complexity you have tried to escape through moral certainty. Nietzsche leaves us with this challenge. Remain faithful to the earth, not to abstract principles, not to moral systems, not to ethical ideologies, but to the earth, to the body, to the complex, contradictory reality of human existence. This fidelity may not make you good, but it might make you honest. And honesty, not goodness, is the beginning of wisdom.